So this was Hitler's attack on Russia, Stalingrad. This is an animated story, so we going to learn this shit right here, right? Like I said, I'm a guy that learn history, that love history, and love to learn history, love to speak about history. The more you know, the better, the more educated you are, and I love to do it. You feel me? I love to talk about it. So, deadliest battle in history, Stalingrad. Hitler's attack on Stalingrad, bro. So he was trying to kind of like he was Loki just trying to take over Russia, and Stalingrad is somewhere he didn't know about, and he didn't fail to capture Stalingrad because they wasn't used to the snow because it's snow in Germany, right? I feel like he failed due to the fact that he destroyed the 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 oil plant the plantations, the oil sites. I feel like he got frustrated due to the fact that what was they called? You know how he had armies, he had soldiers on so many different fronts. He had an army size. He had soldiers like right in front of Stalingrad, ready to attack. That he had armies on this side, soldiers on this side, everywhere. So he thinking that this shit was light work. He like this is it. He got it. But when he realized the soldiers are taking so long to take over, the soldiers are taking so long to take over Stalingrad. He start recruiting some of the army from that side, sending it to the front of Stalingrad, and he started getting frustrated due to the fact that the soldiers started getting hungry. They start needing what's the word, bro? What's the word? They start needing what's the word? They start needing things, right? They start needing things. They start needing like food, water, oils and stuff like that. And then they wasn't able to get any of it. And then you have Russia, who is their soldiers. They have plenty of whatever they want, cause that's their home, that's their country. So they know where everything is at. They know they can access all that. And guess what? Germany's soldiers, Hitler's soldiers, they wasn't able to. The Nazis wasn't able to kind of like access all those things, and that's when they got frustrated. Yeah, supplements. Hey, welcome to the live stream, bro. Welcome to the live stream, gang. So we're gonna watch this. We're watching this video right now about the deadliest battle in history, Stalingrad. So if you do enjoy watching history, bro, take a seat and we're gonna watch this together. We're kind of just going to commentate on that and just educate ourselves. You feel me? So make sure you hit that follow button too. You feel me? I'd appreciate it. But yeah, let's go there. But I had did a little preview on this the other night, so that's how I knew about it. But Hitler definitely let his ego. I feel like the oil crops, that's the oil sites that he destroyed. That's when he lost the war. That's when I knew, like, yeah, he lost that war. But let's go though.
Иногда.
I'm currently studying the readization of Russia, bro. Nice. I haven't heard of that topic yet, but that's something I could get into. You know what I'm saying? If you're doing history, bro, you got me. You feel me? History. I feel like if I were to become a teacher, I would be a history teacher. Let's go.
Когда я закрываю глаза,
Okay. Let's go then.
я снова оказываюсь в Сталинграде.
Stalingrad, stand
Позади
up,
меня
baby.
рушатся городские стены. Я снова с винтовкой в руке. Вместе с товарищами стою против фашистских захватчиков. У нас был простой приказ. Город не должен пасть. Фашисты не должны пройти. Мы держали оборону.
If it's one thing that the Russians were they knew in the right mind. Remember whoever the governor, it wasn't a governor, the military person who was in charge of Stalingrad. One thing he knew and he had in his mind is that Stalingrad would not fall to Hitler. It don't matter what they had to do, Stalingrad would not fall. And I think that's one of the things that pushed them to the point they kind of like they kept fighting to the point, you know, yeah. It's crazy. You did captions, bro? I don't know how to put captions on here, but we're gonna see though.
Сражались 5 месяцев.
Oh, okay, so it is in Russian, so you guys could understand.
Месяцев мы истекали кровью. 5 месяцев мы боролись за каждую комнату в каждом доме. Мы потеряли друзей, свои семьи. Но в итоге мы отстояли Сталинград.
Respect to those soldiers, man, who went out there, bro.
I met Jen after she was ghosted by
known as Fall Blau, or Case Blue. However, Hitler would later add another objective, the capture of the city of Stalingrad, a logistical center named for his communist frenemy. In this video, we will focus on the bloody and brutal Battle of Stalingrad, as two dictators send their men into a meat grinder for the sake of oil and renown. Before we hit the streets of Stalingrad, we'd like to thank our friends over at Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. This great mobile and PC game now has over 600 champions for you to play as. Prepare for epic conflicts against Raid's newest clan boss, the Six-Headed Hydra. This is Raid's biggest and craziest. The city of Stalingrad, formerly known as Tsaritsyn, was not originally part of Nazi plans for Case Blue. Though an important transport hub hosting a number of factories and steelworks, the initial drafts of Case Blue were focused entirely on securing the Caucasian oil fields. The Volga-hugging city of 500,000 inhabitants just didn't figure into German plans. With the failure of Operation Barbarossa still fresh in their minds and the front line stagnating, the dawn of spring meant it was time for a new push into the Soviet Union. This push involved an Axis army of 1.3 million men, 300,000 of whom were soldiers from Italy, Romania, Hungary, and Croatia, advancing towards Astrakhan before securing their northern flank along the Don and the Volga, then advancing south toward the Caucasus. The ever-erratic Hitler, however, decided this plan was far too simple and ordered Army Group South split in two so they could achieve both objectives simultaneously. The newly christened Group A would drive for the Caucasus Mountains in the south, while Group B, Volga. Satisfied that he had complicated his generals' lives sufficiently, Hitler let the offensive begin on June 28th. The Soviets were taken completely by surprise and found
hold on. So they had allies. Germany had allies, Romanian and Italian allies in that war with them. Okay.
The second verse of the Nazi invasion the same as the first. The Germans made rapid progress into Soviet territory, and by mid-July, the German 6th Army under Friedrich Paulus was within striking distance of Stalingrad. Hitler ordered Stalingrad be taken on July 23rd. In addition to being a transport hub and possessing some manufacturing, Stalingrad served as an artery in the Hitler ordered Stalingrad be taken on July 23rd. In addition to being a transport hub and possessing some manufacturing, Stalingrad served as an artery in the Lend-Lease system that saw Allied supplies shipped to the Soviets by way of Iran. But Hitler's 6th Army was growing weaker with every instant.
I'm done spending an obscene amount of money on takeout every week. Done.
I'm getting back on track with Factor. Fresh, never.
German supply lines were stretched so thin that in a grim omen of things to come, some Germans resorted to eating their horses. In addition, a full quarter of Paulus's casualties thus far had been due to typhus and dysentery, which dug their claws deep into both German and Soviet forces. Speaking of Soviets, Stalin had predicted Hitler's change of strategy and was making preparations. Factories churned out a tidal wave of tanks, and reserves were brought in to reinforce Stalingrad. On July 27th, Stalin issued the infamous Order 227, commanding all Soviet soldiers to take not a step back and laid down heavy penalties for officers who retreated without approval. The command was given in direct response to an idea that was sweeping the dispirited Red Army. The Soviets should outrun the Nazis, retreating deeper and deeper into the vast territories of the Soviet Union until the most advantageous time to fight presented itself, where the will to fight did. In his order, Stalin countered this narrative with one of his own. Russian civilians forced under the German yoke were cursing the Red Army for abandoning them in their time of most desperate need. The workers of Russia called on their soldiers to fight. Back in Stalingrad, these same civilians were conscripted to dig trenches or work emergency shifts in arms factories. After nearly a month of preparations on both sides, the Germans and their allies crossed the Don River on August 21st, setting the stage for one of the bloodiest, actually the bloodiest fight in history.
Jesus Christ, man.
The Luftwaffe opened the assault on Stalingrad with a multi-day bombing, which reaches its zenith on August 23rd. 600 bombers of Luftflotte 4 level massive swaths of the city, killing between 40 to 75,000 people. German spearheads draw close to the city not long thereafter, encountering fanatical resistance before driving to the Volga on the northern side, and are promptly cut off by the communists. A pocket forms around this spearhead, and troops under General Gustav
USSR and Germany were both communist countries at that point, with Hitler and then Stalin in power in Russia. They were both, yeah, it's crazy. Not gonna lie. Two communist countries going at it, bro. You know there's no stopping that, bro. Two communist countries. It's crazy.
Anton von Wiedersheim are encircled. 2 days later, General Hermann Hoth leads the 4th Panzer Army in an attack on the southern side of the city, only for the Russians to turn him back. A second armored spearhead manages to break through the northern pocket and drop off critical supplies, but the would-be rescuers abandon the pocket when it becomes clear they did not bring sufficient infantry to hold their position. The Soviets to the south slowly lose men to the northern front line, with the final division remaining in the sector belonging to the NKVD. The secret police are soon reassigned to the northern sector as well, and the drawdown gives Hoth an opening. As the civilian population breaks into a panic, he drives northward, ultimately covering 20 kilometers or just under 12.5 miles. The Soviet commander, Yeremka, withdraws his men to better defensive positions within the city as the Germans advance. August ends with Paulus's 6th Army breaking into the northern encirclement, relieving their comrades after a week of dug-in fighting. The German lines solidify, and as September begins, the Nazis partially encircle Stalin's city. Georgy Zhukov, future hero of the Soviet Union, launches an
eventually Hitler wanted Stalingrad to be captured by the 23rd. Hold on.
An attack in the north meant to break up the German line and once again encircle the fascists. But the Germans are able to hold fast. Zhukov may not encircle his foes, but he captures their attention and ties down a number of Paulus's men. Hitler, seeing yet another opportunity to complicate matters, dismisses the commander of Army Group B and takes personal command of operations in the north. With the Führer himself as their leader, the Germans continue to make the exact same slow but steady progress into Stalingrad, with the 4th gaining ground to the south. The 29th Motor Division in particular becomes the first German unit to reach the southern shores of the Volga on September 9th. With the 29th in place, the Soviet defenders are split into their constituent groups. The 62nd and 64th armies find themselves cut off from each other, with the 62nd reliant on supplies ferried across the Volga, supplies that must make their way through intense German fire. The 62nd is woefully under strength, with their only complete division being the NKVD riflemen that were pulled out in the face of Hoth's drive last month. Despite their shortcomings, the 62nd fights hard, resisting the Germans as they push into the suburbs. Vasily Choykov, commander of the 62nd, orders his frontline troops to hug the German lines, keeping in constant contact to prevent the Luftwaffe providing air support, lest they bomb their fellow Aryans. The close quarters leads to intense urban combat, as the Soviets fight the Axis room by room, house by house, opening a brutal new phase of the battle. The Germans reach Stalingrad proper on September 13th. The Luftwaffe once again rains bombs onto the city, playing a duet of destruction with German heavy artillery. The Soviets respond in kind, counter-barraging with their own guns and Katyusha rockets. Elements of the 6th Army push deep into the city and force the Soviets into a near envelopment. Despite fierce resistance, the Germans capture critical hills overlooking the city center, and over the next 2 days, the Germans will advance through Stalingrad center, capturing railway stations and driving hard for the Volga. With the 4th providing support in the south, the 6th Army reaches the Volga in just 1 day, placing the Germans well inside Stalingrad. But all is not sunshine and sauerkraut for the Germans. The Soviets recapture the heights overlooking the city center on September 16th. General von Wiedersheim, who had so nobly commanded the encircled Germans at the opening of the assault, is sacked when he posits the Germans will ultimately fail to take Stalingrad and suggests a withdrawal from their Volga positions. And further complicating matters, a group of 50 Soviet soldiers fortify a grain elevator, famously holding off the Germans as their offensive begins to slow. The ragged Soviets in the grain elevator would hold out for another 4 days, until the Germans finally cleared them on the 21st. These would not be the last Soviet holdouts, however, as around this same time, a group of Soviet soldiers seize and fortify an apartment block that would come to be known as Pavlov's house. Pavlov's would hold out until November, a siege within a siege of 60 days. The Germans end September holding roughly 2/3 of Stalingrad and preparing for a final push into the industrial heartland of the city. The beleaguered Soviets are reinforced by the 1047th Rifle Regiment, who cross the Volga on the 22nd. They are not the only reinforcements the Soviets can expect, however. The temperature in Stalingrad begins dropping. The icy winds, a dispatch from the Russians' old ally, General Winter. These gales provide a fitting prelude to a storm gathering in the Russian camp. For almost the entire month of September.
No wonder the Russians are so good in the snow, bro. They used to that snow, and they use it to their advantage. You feel me? And bro, have you ever seen a Russian scared of snow, scared of the cold, bro? Them boys, they go to the cold water and shower in it, bro. Like, they don't need no hot water to shower. And then you seen that, and then you go out and try to attack Stalingrad, one of the coldest cities in Russia. How you do that, man?
In utmost secrecy, Joseph Stalin, Georgy Zhukov, and the Stavka, the Russian High Command, have been formulating plans for a counteroffensive, and they're almost ready to make their move. As the Soviet reinforcements continue to make their way into Stalingrad, Paulus launches an assault on the industrial sector. The reinforced Soviets push the Nazis back, and on October 4th, Paulus learns that the 51st Corps, along the tip of the Germanic Spear, has taken such extensive casualties that it has lost all offensive capability. The German halt offensive operations for a full 10 days to rest and resupply, save for a push on October 13th by Hoth that sees the 4th Army finally reach the Volga. The rest of October will be a hard slog for the Germans and Soviets both, as the Germans renew their assault on the industrial district and begin to make headway. The Germans pay dearly for every minute they advance, and the bombing raids by the Luftwaffe that had opened the battle bear bitter fruit. Göring's aces leave a trail of destruction in their wake that inadvertently shifts the battle ever so slightly in the favor of the Soviet defenders. The Communists fortify or hide in hollowed-out buildings and mazes of rubble. making the corpse of the city into a near continuous line of defenses and traps that force the Germans to advance methodically and fight nose to nose.
He said, that's crazy. That's crazy.
My neighbor Brian was like, yo, where'd you get this knife? I'm like, bespoke post, man.
I see you talking about bespoke all the time.
The German advance through the industrial zone continues through November, as the Soviets resist them at every step. By the 11th, the Soviets are pushed into isolated pockets of resistance in factories and houses. Pockets the Germans throw assault after assault at. Assaults that Soviets repel time and again before ultimately failing. The Germans, low on men, materiel, and willpower, begin to stumble. A week later, the Soviets hold only a stretch of the shoreline at the Volga, no more than 10% of the city. The Russians are on the ropes, but the Germans are too battered and undersupplied to press their assault. Paulus could count over 60,000 casualties in the 6th Army alone. Both the Germans and besieged Russians lick their wounds and settle into rhythms of a stalemate, neither side aware of the earth-shattering events to come.
Snow. About to get snowy.
As General Winter covers Stalingrad in a raging blizzard, Zhukov springs his long-prepared trap. The Soviets launch their mammoth counteroffensive, appropriately dubbed Operation Uranus, at 3 o'clock on November 19th. 10 Soviet armies totaling 1 million men, almost 1,000 tanks, and over 1,000 planes wash. Soviet armies totaling 1 million men, almost 1,000 tanks, and over 1,000 planes wash over the Germans like a crimson tide, looking to break out and lock the Nazis in a pincer over a 400-kilometer or 248-mile front. Uranus is timed perfectly, as the frigid winds serve a natural coolant for the tanks, allowing them to drive harder and farther.
And that right here was the Soviet Union's secret power that nobody knew about. Them tanks, the whole time they had soldiers in the front line just fighting, right? In the front line fighting, they had something in the bag getting ready. That wasn't all they had. Compared to Germany, that's all they had. Compared to Hitler's men, all the means that, like, that's all he had right there. You know what I'm saying? Like, he had men on so many different front lines, like, spread out. And even that, with that, he was still, you know, taking soldiers from this side, bringing them to that side, this side to this side. And they still were not able to take over Stalingrad, even though they took like 90%, right? They took over 90% of Stalingrad. They were still, and then Stalingrad, like I said, Operation Uranus was still going on. They were preparing something that was even bigger for them. Your history is beautiful, man. You can't tell me history is not beautiful, man. That was the ultimate chess move right here in my eyes, man.
And in North Africa at the same time, splitting the attention and serve a natural coolant for the tanks, allowing them to drive harder and farther. The Allies land in North Africa at the same time, splitting the attention of High Command in Berlin. Over the course of 3 days, the Soviets succeed in completely reversing the fortunes of the battle, tearing into the Axis lines to encircle 40,000 Romanian troops protecting the Germans' southern flank before driving their pincers into an almost total encirclement of the 4th and 6th armies.
What?
Command in the Allies land for the Uranus, a crimson tide, looking to break out and lock the Nazis in a pincer over a 400-kilometer or 248-mile front. Uranus is timed perfectly, as the frigid winds serve a natural coolant for the tanks, allowing them to drive harder and farther. The Allies land in North Africa at the same time, splitting the attention of High Command in Berlin. Over the course of 3 days, the Soviets succeed in completely reversing the fortunes of the battle, tearing into the Axis lines to encircle 40,000 Romanian troops protecting the Germans' southern flank before driving their pincers into an almost total encirclement of the 4th and 6th armies. Paulus is presented with a fateful decision: attempt a breakout or dig in and wait for the metaphorical cavalry.
So,
As the new
Paulus was one of the top soldiers, well, top generals on Hitler's side, that I think he asked to take over when shit was getting, when he realized certain things was not going as planned. I think he was put in order. He was one of the top general. You know, he wouldn't fumble. He wouldn't like give up. He would do anything and everything in his power to, you know, get the result that they want. But at the end of the war, we know how that ended. It was not that sweet, buddy. It didn't end, and he's, you know, yeah, that thing did not end in his favor whatsoever.
begins to tighten around him, High Command begins entertaining the idea of resupplying the 6th Army by air, an idea that would lay the foundation for the 6th Army's destruction. In a conference on the 23rd, Luftwaffe Chief of Staff Hans Jesenek guarantees Hitler the delivery of 500 tons of supplies per day to their forces in Stalingrad, despite Paulus estimating he needs 700 and the Luftwaffe's own estimate that they could manage 300 at best. The message reaches the Führer just as High Command convinces him that a breakout is the only way to salvage the situation. Buoyed by his Air Force's confidence, Hitler approves the airlift. The Luftwaffe begins dropping critical stockpiles of ammunition and fuel, but no food. As the encirclement drags on, the German army starves. Bread rations are slashed in desperation, and the men begin dining on starves. Bread, but no food. Food. As the encirclement drags on, the German army starves. Bread rations are slashed in desperation, and the men begin dining on sumptuous feasts of horse fat. Wounded men awaiting medevac are placed into thin tents next to supply runways, and as General Winter marches on the German forces, the wounded freeze to death in their cots.
That is crazy, man. Uh-oh.
Have you ever run a background check on yourself?
They had
oh, that's so crazy. What else?
On November 26th, Paulus sends a dispatch to Friedrich von Manstein, overall commander of the German military. Paulus complains that he had not received any communication from High Command for over 36 hours, and that Hitler had denied his request for freedom of action. Paulus asks von Manstein to relieve his besieged force, or else formally order him to attempt a breakout. For his part, Manstein is confident that the 6th Army can hold their position with the Luftwaffe airdrops as their lifeline, confidence that will soon be put to the test. As the Germans starve and the Soviets advance, the Battle of Stalingrad enters its brutal conclusion. As winter well and truly sets in, the supply situation in the German pocket becomes dire. The 3,500 Soviet POWs who have survived long enough to be held by the Germans within their encirclement are officially cut off from all rations, as the Germans must get every scrap of food into their own bellies. The Soviets resort to melting snow, which is contaminated by debris and urine, for water, and cannibalizing on their own dead comrades.
That's crazy.
Meanwhile, the Germans guarding them begin venting their rage on their prisoners,
So,
brutalizing.
Even in Stalingrad, the USSR was not able to provide. Whoa, hold on. What is he doing? Was he about to hit that child? Oh, I guess that's a Russian child. That's crazy. So even USSR was not able to provide their own supply to the men that was in that snow, even though they were on their own territory. And imagine for Hitler's men who are coming from across, from across over there, and expecting to have supplies after months of fighting. It's crazy.
Them with their weapons and dogs. When the Battle of Stalingrad ends, only 30 Soviet POWs will be liberated, venting their rage on their prisoners, brutalizing meat and urine for water, and cannibalizing on their own dead comrades. Meanwhile, the Germans guarding them begin venting their rage on their prisoners, brutalizing them with their weapons and dogs. When the Battle of Stalingrad ends, only 30 Soviet POWs will be liberated by their comrades. But that is months from now. As the snow piles up around him and the Luftwaffe finally begins delivering desperately needed supplies of food, Paulus takes stock of the 6th Army. 34,000 of 300,000 who marched on Stalingrad are still alive. On December 12th, von Manstein launches Operation Winter Storm, an attempt to break through to Paulus and relieve the Germans trapped in Stalingrad. Paulus asks Hitler for permission to break out, and once again he is refused. The 6th Army can only wait for liberty or destruction. There are no other options. Von Manstein drives for Stalingrad, and after a week is bogged down by the Soviets in a mere 48 km or 29 miles from the city. New offensives waylay von Manstein further, and the dutiful Paulus continues to follow his Führer's orders to stay put. As Christmas arrives in Stalingrad, General Winter makes a special delivery to the Nazis. On Christmas Day, 1,300 men die of frostbite en masse. The Soviets bring presents of their own, launching an endless stream of harassing attacks and probes. As they freeze to death or are shot by the Soviets, one can imagine the German soldiers ardently wishing for St. Nicholas to bring them some coal. At least they could burn it for warmth. The new year would only bring new misery for the Germans. Bands of soldiers roam the ruined streets looking for food and warmth. Thousands of wounded languish, untreated due to lack of supplies. The Soviets offer the Germans a generous surrender, giving Paulus the chance to save his men and himself from certain death at the hands of of supplies. The Soviets offer the Germans a generous surrender, giving Paulus the chance to save his men and himself from certain death.
Remember what I said earlier, he would not give up. Paulus would not give up, and he would rather die than to give up.
Death at the hands of General Zhukov or General Winter. The proud Prussian refuses, and on January 6th, the Soviets launch a new wave of attacks that carve the 6th Army into pieces. As his men are forced into two disparate pockets, Paulus's supply situation worsens. The Soviet attacks force his soldiers to abandon critical airfields, and even if they could be held, the Luftwaffe begins throttling back on supply drops, decreasing the tonnage dropped as the encirclement drags. On the 22nd, the Soviets again solicit a surrender, and Paulus sends a message to Hitler that his men have no ammunition nor food, and that his ability to command them is degrading by the moment. 2 days later, he reports that he has 18,000 wounded left completely untreated and begs Hitler for permission to surrender his men to the Soviets.
That's crazy. He's about to explode now.
Hitler orders Paulus to hold his position. To the last man, the last cartridge. Not a day later, the Soviets capture the last remaining airfield that the Germans can use to receive airdrops. Whatever Paulus has in his stores was all he ever will. Throughout the encircled 6th and 4th, 100,000 men die, in January alone, and the two armies have been split into northern and southern pockets with no way of communicating. As Paulus struggles with Hitler's order not to surrender, he receives a most unwelcome surprise, a promotion from Hitler himself to Field Marshal. But instead of an honor, it was a death sentence, as no Field Marshal had ever surrendered or been captured alive before. With the stroke of his pen, Hitler orders Paulus to place himself upon the altar of National Socialism and die.
I've been really into self-help books lately. I find that I can relate to so much of what they're writing about.
Hitler was a demon, bro. It's crazy. Set up that guy.
On January 31st, Paulus becomes the first German field marshal taken captive. To hear him tell it, Paulus and his headquarters staff, who were based out of a department store basement, were suddenly overrun by Soviet forces and had no choice but to allow themselves to be taken into captivity. Paulus would insist to the last man that he never formally surrendered to the Russians and refused their commands to order his men to stand down. The southern pocket collapses under the weight of Paulus's capture, but the northern hangs on, barely. The next day, General Karl Strecker, de facto commander of the Northern Pocket, gathers his staff to tell them of the Southern collapse. He issues a general order empowering all troops under his command to act according to the dictates of their conscience, a flowery way of saying surrender if you want to live, without actually uttering the words. And that is exactly what Strecker does on February 2nd. The 6th Army formally surrenders to Georgy Zhukov, but 11,000 Germans refuse to give up the fight, going to ground in the ruins of Stalingrad. There is no fanatical resistance or desperate grab at victory, however. These were Germans fearful of Soviet reprisal. With no central command nor mission other than survival, these holdouts would hide in the ruins and sewers by day and scavenge what they could at night. Their lives were desperate and violent, engaging in running gunfights with Soviet forces and scratching for meager survival by day. It would take until March of 1943 for the Soviets to root out these renegade Germans and fully secure Stalingrad.
It's crazy.
The civilian population of Stalingrad fared little better than the men in uniform. Though there were sporadic evacuations of civilians throughout the battle, either organized by the Germans or Soviets or in panicked response to the shifting tides of battle, the loss of life was still enormous. 170,000 civilians died in the Battle of Stalingrad, and this number includes those who died after the war, after being enslaved by the Germans and marched to forced labor camps in the Ukraine and elsewhere. While the Soviet POWs under German care had been almost annihilated, the loss of life was still enormous. The civilian population of Stalingrad fared little better than the men in uniform. Though there were sporadic evacuations of civilians throughout the battle, either organized by the Germans or Soviets or in panicked response to the shifting tides of battle, the loss of life was still enormous. 170,000 civilians died in the Battle of Stalingrad, and this number includes those who died after the war, after being enslaved by the Germans and marched to forced labor camps in the Ukraine and elsewhere. While the Soviet POWs under German care had been almost annihilated, the Germans would fare no better. 95% of the men captured by the Soviets at the end of the battle wouldn't see home again. Stalingrad was a bloodbath, a churning engine of destruction fed by human life and misery. But it was also a testament to the fighting spirit of those on the ground, as the Soviets clung by their very fingernails to the city and threw the Germans back.
Yo, that is crazy. But the Soviet Union, they stood on business. Shout out to this guy. What's his name? The armchair historian. Shout out to you, man. Shout out to you. That was a beautiful, well put together story. Amazing. Man. The Russians did what they had to do, man. Hey, man, more history videos to come, okay? Yeah.